You know, when you lose a parent, a part of your world just goes completely hollow. On the day of my father's funeral, I was already heartbroken. But my stepmother, Patricia, made sure that day was even more painful. As the last of the guests were leaving, she walked right up to me. There wasn't a single tear in her eyes. In a voice so cold and quiet, she said, "Claire, your father left nothing for you. You were perfectly fine living with your mother, and you have no right to anything in this house." Those words pierced right through my chest, not because of the money, but because all I ever wanted was my father's love. For 25 years, in that house, I was only ever the first wife's daughter, an inconvenient piece of his past that they only tolerated on alternate weekends. I had to watch, with my own two eyes, as Patricia's daughter, Melissa, got all of my father's attention. The expensive schools, the lavish birthdays, the endless love. Meanwhile, I was constantly told, if you need something, ask your mother for it. If you've ever felt rejected by your own parent, you might understand how deep that kind of ache really goes. When the will was read a few days later, it turned out Patricia was right. Everything, the house, the assets, the business, was left entirely to Melissa. I walked away that day hiding my tears, finally accepting that my father simply never loved me. But, exactly 3 weeks later, while cleaning out a dusty drawer in my father's old study, I found an envelope. And what was inside that envelope shattered Patricia's web of lies in a single second. My father hadn't forgotten me. He had left something behind for me, something Patricia had deliberately hidden for years. And when I realized the horrifying fraud she had committed while my father was weak and dying of cancer, I decided right then and there that 25 years of tears were finally over. If you have ever been pushed aside by your own family, or if you've ever had to quietly endure betrayal from the people who were supposed to care for you, please, stay with me until the end. Because what I did with that envelope changed Patricia and Melissa's lives forever. And if my story touches your heart today, please take a moment to subscribe to this small channel of ours. Your love and support truly mean the world to us. My name is Claire. If you were to look at a photo album of my first 6 years of life, you would see a perfectly ordinary, perfectly happy family. My mother, Linda, had this warm, infectious laugh, and my father, Robert, used to look at us like we were the center of his entire universe. I remember him carrying me on his shoulders, telling me that I would always be his little princess. But you know as well as I do that life has a funny way of taking the things we take for granted and turning them upside down. When I was 7 years old, my parents sat me down in our living room and told me they were getting a divorce. They used all the gentle words adults use to protect children, that they still loved me, that nothing was my fault, that we would just be living in 2 different houses now. But children are much smarter than we give them credit for. I could feel the coldness between them. I could see my mother's red, puffy eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. My mother and I moved out of that beautiful suburban home and into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment across town. My mom took on a second job just to keep the lights on and put food on the table. I grew up watching her count pennies at the kitchen table late at night, rubbing her tired temples. She gave up everything for me. She stopped buying new clothes, stopped going out, and poured every ounce of her energy into making sure I felt secure. But my father's life went in a completely different direction. Less than a year after the divorce became final, he married Patricia. Patricia was a wealthy, polished woman who always smelled of expensive perfume and wore clothes that looked like they belonged in a magazine. And she didn't come into my father's life alone. She brought her own daughter from a previous relationship, Melissa, who was exactly my age. I want to pause my story right here for just a moment. If you are enjoying this journey so far, and if you relate to the struggles of raising a child through hard times, please take a second to subscribe to this small channel of ours. It genuinely helps us continue bringing you these heartfelt stories, and your support means the absolute world to us. Thank you. Now, let's get back to the story. When my father married Patricia, he didn't just get a new wife. He got a brand new family. They moved into a massive, gorgeous house in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city. And almost overnight, Melissa became the daughter my father had always wanted. He formally adopted her, and suddenly, my father's money, his time, and his love were all being poured into Patricia and Melissa's perfect life. I would sit on the worn-out sofa in my mother's small apartment, watching my mom exhaust herself just to buy me a new pair of school shoes. Meanwhile, just a few miles away, Melissa was being enrolled in an elite private academy, taking horseback riding lessons and living a life of absolute luxury, all funded by my father. I was just a little girl, but the harsh reality was already setting in. My father had built a beautiful, shining new world, and my mother and I were no longer a part of it. The custody arrangement meant I was supposed to spend every other weekend at my father's house. I'm sure some of you listening know the terrible anxiety of being a child of divorce, packing a small duffel bag on a Friday afternoon, waiting by the window for a car to pull into the driveway. Every time I stepped through the grand double doors of my father's new house, I felt an overwhelming sense of not belonging. It wasn't my home, it was Patricia's home, and she made sure I never forgot it. Melissa had a bedroom painted in soft blush pink, with a walk-in closet overflowing with toys, designer dresses, and shiny new electronics. I, on the other hand, was put in a sterile guest room at the end of the hall. There were no pictures of me on the walls. None of my drawings were on the refrigerator. When I was there, I felt like an unwanted visitor who had overstayed her welcome. Patricia never yelled at me. She was far too calculated for that. Instead, she used a kind of quiet, polite cruelty. If I came over wearing a sweater that was a little faded, she would sigh, look at my father, and say, "Robert, couldn't Linda afford to buy Claire a proper coat?" It's a shame how much that woman struggles. It was never framed as an insult toward me, but rather a constant, degrading reminder that my mother and I were poor, and they were not. If I ever asked for anything, a new backpack, help with a school trip, Patricia would immediately step in with that same perfectly polite voice. "Oh, sweetie, your father pays your mother child support every month. You should really ask her for that. We have Melissa's private school tuition to pay this week." I want to take a quick pause here. If you know what it feels like to be treated like an outsider by the people who are supposed to love you, please leave a comment and hit that subscribe button. This channel is a safe space for women like us, and subscribing truly helps our community grow. Let's continue. The hardest part wasn't Patricia's cruelty. The hardest part was my father's silence. I would look at him across the dinner table, desperately waiting for him to defend me. I waited for him to tell Patricia to stop, to remind her that I was his flesh and blood, that I mattered just as much as Melissa. But he never did. My father was a man who hated conflict. He wanted his new life to be peaceful and easy, and standing up for me meant arguing with Patricia. So, he chose the easy way out. He simply looked down at his plate and stayed quiet. I remember Melissa's sweet 16 birthday party. It was a lavish affair at a country club, with a live band and a professional photographer. My father bought her a brand new convertible, handing her the keys with tears of joy in his eyes. When my 16th birthday arrived 3 months later, I spent it at my mom's apartment. My mother baked me a cake from a boxed mix, and we watched movies together. My father called me the next morning to apologize. He said he had been caught up in a business meeting, and he promised to make it up to me. He never did. By the time I graduated high school, I had learned to build a wall around my heart. I stopped expecting my father to show up. I stopped asking him for help. I put myself through college using student loans and working double shifts as a waitress, just like my mother had done for me. I accepted that I was the ghost of my father's past, and Melissa was his future. But I had no idea just how far Patricia was willing to go to completely erase me from his life. Until my father got sick. Years went by. I built a quiet, independent life for myself. I worked hard. I took care of my mother as she got older, and I learned to accept the empty space in my life where my father should have been. I told myself that I was fine. We all do that, don't we? We build these thick, invisible walls around our hearts to protect ourselves from the people who are supposed to love us, but don't. I was 28 years old, working a late shift, when I got the phone call. It wasn't my father who called. It wasn't even Patricia. It was my father's old secretary, a kind woman named Martha, who had known me since I was a little girl. Her voice was shaking. My father had been diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer, and it was already in the late stages. Despite everything, despite the missed birthdays, the deafening silence, the blatant favoritism of Melissa, he was still my father. Somewhere deep down beneath that wall I had built, that little 7-year-old girl who used to ride on his shoulders still loved him. And honestly, I think I was hoping for what we all blindly hope for at the end of a difficult, broken relationship. I was hoping for a deathbed reconciliation. I wanted to hear him say, just once, that he was sorry, that I mattered, that he loved me. But Patricia had other plans. When my father's condition worsened, he was brought home under hospice care. They set up a medical bed in the grand master suite of their massive house, and from that moment on, Patricia became the ultimate gatekeeper of his final days. Every single time I drove across town after a long, exhausting day of work to see him, I had to get past her first. I remember the physical chill of standing on their grand, sweeping front porch in the middle of November. I would stand there, holding a container of homemade soup or a book I thought he might like to hear me read, shivering in the cold. Patricia would open the heavy oak door just a crack. She would look at me with those cold, perfectly made-up eyes, wearing expensive cashmere, and she would sigh heavily, as if my mere presence was an unbearable burden. "Claire, sweetie, he's just so incredibly tired today," she would say, her body firmly blocking the entryway. The doctor was very clear. He needs absolute, uninterrupted rest. We really can't have anyone upsetting him right now with emotional drama. Melissa was just in there reading to him, and it took a lot out of his energy. Immediate family only for now, okay? Immediate family only. I want you to really think about those words. The words stung like a physical slap across the face, leaving a mark that nobody else could see. I was his biological daughter. My blood ran through his veins, but in Patricia's twisted, carefully curated world, I was just a stressful outsider, an inconvenience from a past he had supposedly outgrown. I want to pause here for a brief moment. If you have ever had to watch someone you love slip away, and if you know how excruciatingly painful it is to be kept from saying goodbye to them, my heart goes out to you. If Claire's quiet heartbreak is resonating with you today, please take a second to hit the subscribe button on this small channel of ours. We are building a wonderful, supportive community of strong women, and your support means everything to us. Let's return to the story. I fought to see him. I truly did. I swallowed my pride and begged her. There were a few rare times I managed to slip past her and sit by his bedside. The contrast in that room was haunting. The sterile, beeping medical equipment, surrounded by opulent velvet curtains and expensive antique furniture. He looked so frail, so different from the strong, vibrant man of my childhood memories. His skin was pale, and his breathing was shallow. I would pull up a chair, hold his thin, cold hand, and whisper that I loved him, praying with everything in me that he could hear my voice through the heavy fog of the morphine. But I never got a moment alone with him. Never. Patricia would always hover in the doorway, her arms crossed. She would tap her foot, check her gold watch, and loudly clear her throat, making sure I knew my time was up. She made absolutely certain that I never got my moment of closure. She made sure my father and I never had that final, honest conversation. 3 months after his diagnosis, late on a rainy Tuesday night, my father passed away. And once again, I wasn't the one they called. I found out the next morning. The funeral was exactly what you would expect from Patricia. It was a grand, expensive, highly orchestrated social event. She and Melissa sat in the front row, dressed in immaculate, tailored black designer mourning clothes. They dabbed at their dry eyes with lace handkerchiefs, while wealthy members of the country club lined up to offer their condolences. I sat 3 rows back, alone in my simple black dress. I watched them perform their tragic grief for the crowd. I watched them accept the hugs and the pity. And I just sat there in the shadows, quietly mourning a man I had actually lost 20 years before he even took his final breath. The days following the funeral passed in a strange, heavy blur. I went back to work, I checked on my mother, and I tried to process the absolute finality of it all. There was no more hoping he would call. There was no more waiting for an apology. He was gone. A week later, I checked my mailbox and found a thick, formal envelope made of heavy parchment paper. The return address belonged to a high-end local law firm. It was a formal invitation to the reading of my father's last will and testament. I didn't expect much. I want to be completely honest with you about that. I wasn't delusional. I knew my father's life and his wealth had revolved entirely around Patricia and Melissa for the last 2 decades. But a small, naive, vulnerable part of me thought that maybe, just maybe, in his final legal document, he would acknowledge me. I didn't care about millions of dollars. I just wanted a token, a family heirloom, a photograph, or even just a written paragraph acknowledging that I was his firstborn daughter. Just something to prove that I had mattered. When I arrived at the lawyer's office downtown, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Patricia and Melissa were already there, sitting on a plush leather sofa in the center of the room. They looked entirely too comfortable. Patricia gave me a tight, pitying smile when I walked in, but she didn't offer a greeting. I took a seat in a stiff wooden chair on the opposite side of the room, keeping my distance. The lawyer was a stern-looking man, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He cleared his throat, opened a thick manila folder on his massive mahogany desk, and began to read. As his deep voice filled the quiet room, reading through pages of dense legal jargon, the sheer magnitude of my father's estate began to take shape. It was massive, far bigger than I had ever imagined. There were multiple commercial properties, diverse investment portfolios, controlling shares in his business, and several high-yield bank accounts. And then came the distribution of those assets. I sat there, my hands folded so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were turning white. I listened, my heart pounding in my ears, as the lawyer read my father's final wishes. The primary luxury residence went entirely to Patricia. The summer vacation home in the mountains went to Melissa. The business shares were divided equally between the 2 of them. The cash accounts were handed over to a trust, managed by Patricia, strictly for Melissa's future endeavors and lifestyle maintenance. He read page after page after page. And not once, not a single time, did my name come out of his mouth. I want to pause again for just a moment. Being erased by the people who are supposed to protect you is a pain that is incredibly hard to describe to someone who hasn't lived it. If you understand the kind of quiet, suffocating heartbreak Claire is going through in that room, please let me know by subscribing to our channel and leaving a comment below. It truly helps us keep sharing these important stories. Let's go back to that room. The lawyer finally closed the heavy folder, took off his glasses, and offered us his professional condolences. It was over. I had been completely, legally, and intentionally erased from my father's legacy. It was as if I had never existed at all. I felt completely numb. A cold, hollow ringing started in my ears. I stood up from my chair slowly, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the carpet. I didn't want to cry in front of them. I refused to give Patricia the sick satisfaction of seeing me break down. I walked out of the office without saying a word, out into the marble-floored hallway, heading straight for the elevator bank. I just wanted to get to my car. I just wanted to breathe. But before I could push the elevator button, I heard the sharp, unmistakable clicking of expensive heels on the marble floor behind me. "Claire, wait." I turned around to see Patricia walking toward me. She didn't look like a grieving widow anymore. She looked victorious. She stopped a few feet away from me, her posture perfectly straight, her chin tilted up in a pose of absolute dominance. She looked at me with those ice-cold eyes, lowering her voice so the receptionist down the hall couldn't hear her. "I know you're disappointed, Claire," she said, her tone dripping with fake, sugary sympathy. "But you have to be realistic about these things. Your father left you nothing because he knew you didn't belong in our world. You were perfectly fine living a simple life with your mother all those years. You have no right to anything his hard work built for us. It's time for you to finally move on and leave our family in peace." I stood there in the quiet hallway, staring at the woman who had spent the last 20 years systematically pushing me out of my father's life. I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. I simply turned around, stepped into the elevator, and let the heavy metal doors close between us. I drove home that day with tears blurring my vision, finally accepting the devastating truth. My father had never cared. Patricia had won the war she had waged against me since I was 7 years old, or so I thought. Because what I didn't know yet was that the will that lawyer had just read wasn't the whole story, not even close, and Patricia's perfect, victorious world was about to come crashing down in a way she could never have seen coming. For 2 weeks after the reading of the will, I barely left my house. I went through the motions of daily life like a ghost. I went to work, I came home, I drank tea in the dark, and I cried until there were simply no tears left. It wasn't about the money. I want to make that very clear. I had survived my entire life without my father's wealth, and I was perfectly capable of continuing to do so. The pain came from the absolute, undeniable confirmation that I hadn't mattered to him. Patricia's cruel words echoed in my head every single night. "You have no right to anything his hard work built. It's time for you to finally move on and leave our family in peace." I had accepted it. I really had. I told myself that this was the end of the story. But then, on a quiet Thursday evening, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something compelled me to answer it. It was Martha, my father's old secretary. She had worked for his company for 30 years and had recently been forced into early retirement by Patricia, right after my father passed away. "Claire, honey." Martha's voice was trembling, sounding much older than I remembered. "I debated calling you. I really did. Patricia made it very clear that I wasn't to contact you, but my conscience just won't let me sleep." I sat up straight on my couch, my heart suddenly beating a little faster. "Martha, what is it? What's wrong?" "It's about your father's will, Claire," she whispered, her voice dropping as if she was afraid someone was listening. "The will that lawyer read, it wasn't the original. Your father had a different will. He updated it just 5 years ago." I know, because I was the one who typed up his notes for the lawyer before it was finalized. I stopped breathing for a second. "What do you mean it wasn't the original?" "I mean," Martha said, taking a shaky breath, "that, in the original will, Robert didn't leave everything to Patricia and Melissa. He left a third of the estate, including a massive life insurance policy, directly to you. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of, Claire. He told me himself." My mind started spinning. But the lawyer read a completely different document. He said Patricia got the house, and Melissa got the rest. "I know," Martha said, her voice filled with sadness. "That new will, the one they read, It was drawn up just 6 weeks before your father died. Claire. He was on heavy morphine at that point. He barely knew what day it was, let alone what legal documents he was signing. Patricia brought a different lawyer to the house, a friend of hers. I wasn't allowed in the room, but I know what she did. She had him sign a new will when he was too weak to understand what he was doing. I want to pause here for a moment. Hearing that someone you love was manipulated in their weakest, most vulnerable moments is a sickening feeling. If you are rooting for Claire to uncover the truth and fight back against Patricia's greed, please take a second to subscribe to this small channel of ours. We love sharing these stories of resilience with you, and your support helps us grow. Let's return to the story. I sat on the phone with Martha for another hour. She told me that while she didn't have a copy of the new will, she knew that my father had always kept his most private, important documents in a hidden safe deposit box at a small community bank downtown, not the large corporate bank Patricia used. Patricia doesn't know about the community bank, Claire, Martha told me before she hung up. Robert kept it a secret from her. He said she spent money too fast, and he wanted a backup plan. If the original will, or the life insurance policy, is anywhere, it's in that box. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. The grief that had been suffocating me for weeks suddenly vanished, replaced by a hot, fierce, undeniable wave of anger. My father hadn't erased me. He hadn't forgotten me. He had tried to provide for me, and Patricia, the woman who had spent 20 years making me feel like garbage, had stolen it from me while my father was dying in a morphine haze. I didn't cry that night. I didn't feel sorry for myself. For the first time in my entire life, I felt ready to fight. The next morning, I took the day off from work. I dressed carefully, putting on a sharp blazer and tying my hair back. I needed to look confident, even though my stomach was tied in knots. I drove downtown to the small community bank Martha had mentioned. It was an old, quiet brick building, far away from the flashy financial district. When I walked in, I approached the teller, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, and explained who I was. I brought my father's death certificate, my birth certificate, and my ID. I believe my late father, Robert, had a safe deposit box here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I am his biological daughter. The teller typed my father's name into her computer. She frowned slightly, clicking a few keys, and then looked up at me. Yes, he did have a box here. But as per bank policy, unless you are listed as a beneficiary or have the physical key, I can't grant you access. My heart sank. I didn't have a key. Patricia had cleaned out my father's study weeks ago. If there was a key, it was either thrown away or sitting in her expensive purse. Please. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. My father recently passed away. I believe there are documents in that box that prove a crime has been committed regarding his estate. Is there any way you can check who is listed on the account? She looked at my desperate face, sighed softly, and turned back to her screen. She clicked a few more times. Suddenly, her eyes widened. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "you don't need a key." I blinked. "I don't?" "No," she replied, turning the screen slightly toward me. "Your father didn't just list you as a beneficiary. 5 years ago, he transferred the primary ownership of this specific box entirely into your name. According to our system, you are the sole legal owner of Box 402. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. He had put it in my name. He had made sure Patricia couldn't touch it. I want to pause again for a quick moment here. If you love stories where the truth finally comes to light and justice is waiting right around the corner, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's see what was inside that box. The bank manager escorted me to the vault. We walked through the heavy steel doors, and he used the master key to open the small metal door of Box 402. He handed me the long metal tin, pointed to a private viewing room in the corner, and left me alone. I sat down at the small wooden table in the private room. My hands were trembling as I placed the cold metal box in front of me. This was it. This was the moment that would either confirm Martha's story or leave me with nothing. I took a deep breath, flipped the latch, and opened the lid. Inside, there was a stack of thick, legal-sized papers wrapped in a clear plastic sleeve. On top of the papers was a handwritten letter. I recognized my father's messy, rushed handwriting instantly. The letter was dated 3 years ago. "Claire," it read, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I know I have not been the father you deserved. I let my desire for peace in my household overshadow my duty to protect you, and for that, I will be sorry until my dying breath. Patricia is a complicated woman, and I fear what she might do when I am no longer here to stop her. Inside this box is my official, legally binding will, and a life insurance policy worth $2 million, naming you as the sole beneficiary. Do not let her take what is yours. I love you, Claire. I always have." Tears finally spilled over my eyelashes and dropped onto the paper, blurring the blue ink. He loved me. He had always loved me. He was weak, he was flawed, and he had made terrible mistakes, but in the end, he had tried to protect me. I wiped my tears and pulled out the documents beneath the letter. There it was, the original will, the one Martha had typed up. It clearly stated that 1/3 of all his assets, his business shares, and a $2 million life insurance policy were to be given directly to me. Patricia had lied. She had brought a crooked lawyer into my father's hospice room, placed a pen in his trembling, morphine-dosed hand, and forced him to sign away my inheritance to fuel her own greed. I carefully folded the letter, placed the original will and the insurance policy into my bag, and walked out of the bank vault. I didn't just have suspicions anymore. I had physical, undeniable, legally binding proof. Patricia thought she could erase 25 years of my life with a fake document. She thought I was just a weak, poor girl who would quietly walk away. She was about to find out exactly whose daughter I really was. The Monday morning after my visit to the bank vault, I didn't go to work. I had spent the entire weekend researching the best estate litigation attorneys in the city, reading through reviews and case histories until my eyes burned. I needed someone ruthless, someone who wouldn't be intimidated by Patricia's wealth or her country club connections. I found a woman named Eleanor Vance. She was a senior partner at a firm downtown, known for tearing apart fraudulent wills and exposing fiduciary abuse. When I walked into her office, a beautiful, intimidating space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, I didn't feel like the scared, neglected girl who used to hide in the guest room at my father's house. I felt focused. I sat across from Eleanor, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s, and I placed my father's handwritten letter, the original will, and the $2 million life insurance policy on her polished glass desk. Eleanor read the letter first. Then she spent the next 20 minutes carefully reviewing the original will and comparing it to the timeline of my father's illness. When she finally looked up at me, she took off her reading glasses. There was a cold, professional fire in her eyes. "Claire," Eleanor said, her voice steady and commanding, "what your stepmother did here is not just morally repulsive. It is illegal. Getting a heavily medicated, dying man to sign a new will that drastically alters the distribution of his estate is textbook, undue influence, and fraud. She exploited his lack of testamentary capacity." I took a deep breath. "Can we prove it?" "She has a lot of money, Eleanor. She'll fight this with everything she has." "Let her try," Eleanor replied, leaning back in her leather chair. "I am going to subpoena your father's complete medical records from the hospice care team. I will get the doctors to testify under oath about the dosage of morphine he was receiving during the exact week that fake will was signed. He was in no mental state to execute a legal document, and we will prove it. Furthermore, the life insurance policy in this box bypasses the estate entirely. It is a direct contract between your father and the insurance company, naming you as the sole beneficiary. Patricia can't touch it. She can't block it. It is already yours. A wave of profound relief washed over me. For 25 years, Patricia had held all the power. She had controlled my father's attention, his time, and his legacy. But sitting in that office, looking at the solid, undeniable proof on Eleanor's desk, I realized that Patricia's power had always been an illusion. It was built on lies, manipulation, and greed. Eleanor explained the next steps. We were going to file an immediate injunction to freeze all of my father's assets, preventing Patricia from selling any properties or moving any money into offshore accounts. Then, we would serve her with a formal lawsuit contesting the validity of the new will. I want to pause here for just a moment. Standing up to an abuser, someone who has made you feel small your entire life, requires a kind of courage that is terrifying to find. If you are proud of Claire for finally fighting back, please take a second to subscribe to this small channel of ours. We love building a community of strong, resilient women, and your support means the world to us. Let's return to the story. I will have the injunction filed and the papers served to her by a process server tomorrow morning, Eleanor said, gathering the documents into a neat stack. No, I said, my voice surprisingly firm. Eleanor paused, raising an eyebrow. No, don't send a process server, I told her, looking her directly in the eye. I want to deliver the papers myself. I want to look her in the face when she realizes it's over. Eleanor studied me for a long moment, a slow, approving smile spreading across her face. She nodded once. I'll have the documents drafted by 5 o'clock. The next evening, I pulled my car into the long, sweeping driveway of my father's grand estate. The house looked exactly the same as it always did. Perfectly manicured lawns, expensive lighting, an absolute picture of upper-class perfection. But this time, I wasn't an unwanted guest coming for a forced weekend visit. I walked up the stone steps and rang the doorbell. A few moments later, the heavy oak door swung open. It wasn't the housekeeper. It was Patricia. She was wearing a silk blouse and holding a glass of white wine, looking like she hadn't a single care in the world. When she saw me standing on the porch, her relaxed expression instantly vanished, replaced by that familiar, cold irritation. Claire, she sighed, gripping the edge of the door as if to block my entry, just as she had done when my father was dying. What are you doing here? I thought we made it very clear at the lawyer's office that there is nothing left for you to discuss with us. We actually have a lot to discuss, Patricia, I said calmly. May I come in? No, you may not, she snapped, her tone dripping with venom. Melissa is entertaining friends in the living room, and I am not going to let you ruin her evening with another one of your pathetic attempts to beg for money. Your father made his choice. You need to accept that you were never a real part of this family and leave. She started to close the door in my face. I reached out and placed my hand flat against the heavy wood, stopping it from shutting. I didn't push hard, but I held my ground. I'm not here to beg, Patricia, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady register. I'm here to serve you. I want to pause again for a quick moment here. If you are enjoying this story of truth finally coming to light, and the moment a bully gets exactly what they deserve, please hit that subscribe button. We are a small channel, and your subscription is the biggest compliment you can give us. Let's get back to the porch. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope. I held it out toward her. Patricia looked at the envelope, her brow furrowing in confusion. What is this? It's an injunction, I replied, watching her face carefully. Signed by a judge this morning. As of 2 hours ago, every single bank account, investment portfolio, and property associated with my father's estate has been legally frozen. You cannot withdraw a single dollar, and you cannot sell a single asset. The color began to drain from Patricia's perfectly powdered face. Her hand trembled slightly, making the wine in her glass ripple. You can't do that. You have no legal standing. The will clearly stated. The fake will you forced a dying, heavily medicated man to sign? I interrupted, my voice cutting through the cool evening air like a knife. The one you had drafted just weeks before he died, when he was so high on morphine he barely knew his own name? Patricia gasped, taking a step back. The sheer panic in her eyes was something I had never seen before. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I found his safe deposit box, Patricia, I continued, taking a step forward into the doorway, forcing her to retreat further into the foyer. The one at the community bank. The one he put entirely in my name so you couldn't find it. I have his handwritten letter. I have the original will. And I have the $2 million life insurance policy he left directly to me. That's a lie, she stammered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. Her polished, aristocratic demeanor was completely shattering right in front of me. He wanted Melissa and me to have everything. He wanted to protect me from you, I corrected her softly. And he did. Just then, Melissa walked into the foyer from the living room, holding her own glass of wine. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me standing there, and then looked at her mother's pale, terrified face. "Mom? What's going on? Why is Claire here?" Melissa asked, looking confused and slightly annoyed. I looked at Melissa. I didn't hate her. She was just as spoiled and entitled as her mother had raised her to be. But she needed to hear the truth, too. "I'm here to let your mother know that my lawyer is filing a lawsuit for felony fiduciary fraud tomorrow morning," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the grand, high-ceilinged entryway. "The will that gave you this house and the business was forged while my father was dying. My lawyer has the medical records to prove he lacked the mental capacity to sign it." Melissa dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the marble floor, red wine spilling everywhere, but neither she nor Patricia moved a muscle. I looked back at Patricia, the woman who had spent 25 years making me feel like I was completely worthless. "You have 30 days to respond to the lawsuit," I told her, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "If you try to fight me, my lawyer will take this to criminal court, and you will go to prison for fraud. But even if you surrender the estate, Patricia, you are going to lose everything you stole from me. The house, the money, the business, all of it." I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't need to hear her excuses or her desperate lies. I turned around, walked down the stone steps, and headed back to my car. I left Patricia and Melissa standing in the doorway of their beautiful, stolen mansion, surrounded by shattered glass, realizing that their perfect world was finally, permanently over. The fallout over the next several months was nothing short of absolute devastation for Patricia and Melissa. Faced with the undeniable medical records proving my father's severe morphine dosage, the original will, and the handwritten letter in my father's own words, Patricia's crooked lawyer quickly backed out, refusing to represent her in a losing criminal battle. Cornered and terrified of facing felony fraud charges that could put her in federal prison for years, Patricia had no choice but to surrender. She signed a massive settlement agreement, legally nullifying the fake will and reinstating the original document my father had intended all along. The grand, sweeping estate, the house where I had been treated as an unwanted ghost for 25 years, was put on the market and sold. The proceeds were divided according to the original will. Patricia was forced to downsize drastically, moving into a modest, 2-bedroom condominium on the outskirts of the city. The social fallout was even worse for her than the financial ruin. In the wealthy, exclusive circles of the country club where Patricia had spent decades cultivating her image, gossip spreads faster than a wildfire. When the truth came out about how she had manipulated a dying man and tried to steal an inheritance from his biological daughter, her highly curated reputation was destroyed overnight. Her friends stopped calling. The dinner party invitations completely stopped. She became a social pariah, trapped in a tiny apartment, entirely alone with her own bitterness. Melissa's life took a sharp turn as well. Because the trust fund Patricia had set up for her with my father's stolen cash was dissolved, Melissa suddenly found herself cut off from the endless flow of luxury she had enjoyed her entire life. For the first time, she had to get a real job. She had to pay her own rent. I heard through mutual acquaintances that the stress of losing their wealth caused a massive rift between Patricia and Melissa, and they barely speak to each other anymore. As for me, the money changed my life. Of course it did. The $2 million life insurance policy, combined with my rightful third of the estate, meant that I would never have to worry about finances again. But I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't buy a flashy convertible, and I certainly didn't try to buy my way into the country club. Instead, I did the one thing that truly mattered to me. I bought a beautiful, cozy house in a quiet, safe neighborhood, and I moved my mother in with me. My mother, who had worked double shifts for years, who had counted pennies at the kitchen table, and who had sacrificed her entire youth to make sure I felt safe and loved. I retired her immediately. I set up a comfortable account for her to travel, to garden, and to finally live a life without the crushing weight of financial anxiety. Seeing the pure, unburdened joy on her face as she planted roses in her new backyard was worth more to me than every single penny in my father's bank accounts. I want to pause here one last time. If you have stayed with me through this entire journey, please consider subscribing to our channel and leaving a comment. Hearing your thoughts and reading your own stories makes all the hard work we put into these videos completely worth it. Now, let me tell you how this story finally ends. Last Sunday afternoon, I drove out to the cemetery. It was a crisp, clear autumn day, the kind of day my father used to love when I was a very little girl, before the divorce changed everything. I walked across the manicured grass until I reached his headstone. I stood there for a long time, just looking at his name carved into the granite. For most of my life, my father was a source of profound, unexplainable pain. I had spent 2.5 decades aching for his validation, waiting for him to stand up for me, waiting for him to prove that I was just as important as Melissa. And for a long time, I carried the heavy, suffocating belief that his silence meant he didn't care. But as I stood there, in the quiet cemetery, feeling the cool autumn breeze, I finally let that burden go. My father was a flawed, deeply imperfect man. He was cowardly when it came to Patricia, and he chose the path of least resistance because he was afraid of conflict. He failed me in 100 different ways while he was alive. But in the very end, when the noise faded and he knew his time was running out, he didn't forget me. He took a secret trip to a community bank. He wrote me a letter. He tried, in the only quiet, hidden way he knew how, to protect me from the woman he had married. He loved me. It wasn't the loud, protective, perfect kind of love I had always wanted, but it was real. And the truth I found in that dusty safe deposit box wasn't just about money. It was the absolute confirmation that I had mattered to him. I placed a small bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums on his grave. I whispered a quiet thank you, and for the first time in 25 years, I felt a deep, genuine sense of peace. I turned around and walked back to my car, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. My name is Claire. I am not the first wife's daughter. I am not a ghost, and I am certainly not a victim. I am a woman who fought for her truth, who protected her mother, and who finally learned her own worth. And my life, my beautiful, hard-earned life is just beginning. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today and listening to Claire's incredible journey. It is absolutely heartbreaking to think about the people we are supposed to trust pushing us aside, but Claire's strength reminds us that the truth always, always finds its way into the light. If this story touched your heart today, please let me know by leaving a comment below. I read every single one, and I would absolutely love to hear from you. Have you ever discovered a hidden truth that completely changed the way you looked at your past? If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It is the biggest compliment you can give to our small channel, and it allows us to keep bringing these powerful, heartfelt stories to you every single week. Until next time, take care of yourselves, know your worth, and never let anyone treat you like you don't belong. Have a beautifully blessed day, and I will see you in the next story.